moment from the past, a cut-off lifeline. Down the street, past the monotonous houses covered with thatched roofs, ran a middle-aged ticitl healer. He was in a hurry. From time to time, he stumbled and fell, but got up and ran toward his destination again. Finally, he found himself in front of a palace surrounded by a high hedge. At the gate, he was met by guards armed with spears. Two women peeked out from behind them. Without giving the ticitl a chance to catch his breath, these maids led him to the palace. All three of them walked through several spacious, luxuriously furnished halls and finally entered a bedroom. An older woman was lying on the blankets that covered the floor in this spacious room. A man in rich clothes was lying and snoring next to her. He was clutching a cup in one hand. Judging by the smell that filled the air, the man was drunk. The room was lit by a fire burning in a ceramic bowl. Wet rags lay here and there on the blankets. The woman was moaning in pain. At the sight of the ticitl, she let out a scream. The maids tore off her blanket, and the healer knelt in front of her. Her labor had begun. They did not rush but worked swiftly. Presently, a baby cried in the ticitl's arms.
Girl,
the maids said in unison. The woman in labor leaned her head back on the pillow. Tears streamed down her face, distorted with pain. But these were not tears of joy. The man snoring rhythmically next to the woman in labor did not wake up, but the cup fell out of his hand. Three people came out of the next room. The first was an old man dressed simply as he is at his home. Tufts of gray hair peeked out from under the tunic at his chest. The old man's arms and body were decorated with faded tattoos, and his head was uncovered. It was Moctezuma, Weyitlatoani of Tenochtitlan, his wrinkled face revealing his fatigue. The maids immediately left the room. Moctezuma was accompanied by another man, slightly younger. Unlike Moctezuma, he was dressed as if a festive gathering was waiting for him there. It was the cihuacoatl of Aztlan, the Weyitlatoani's main chief assistant. The last one was a young man of about 15 years old.
Help your mother,
Moctezuma said to the young man.
Cut off the lifeline.
The young man approached the naked older woman lying on the blankets. He looked at the newborn girl who was still streaked with blood and the boy's face distorted with a grimace of disgust. The young man took out a translucent blue obsidian dagger from its sheath and cut off the umbilical cord.
Moctezuma, this is a very bad sign,
said Cihuacoatl in his exquisite dress.
The priests promised the people a boy would be born, and after the troubles that have come to our land, after locusts, drought, frost, and the flood on Lake Texcoco, the people will not bear this news. The birth of a girl will cause an uproar. Before people find out about the newborn, you have to take as many citizens as possible and leave the city for war. Take the warriors away with you, so that they don't start an uprising. While you are away, Atotoztli will be able to deal with the affairs of the courts and trade.
After finishing his speech, Cihuacoatl looked at the woman on the blankets. Only now she was able to pull the blanket over herself to cover her naked body. The pain on her face was replaced by despair. The drunk lying next to the woman muttered something, rolled over, and began to snore again. Moctezuma looked at him with hatred. Meanwhile, the ticitl cleaned the newborn's body and wrapped her in a piece of clean cloth. She wasn't crying or screaming anymore. Her eyes did not look in different directions, as happens with ordinary newborns. The girl's gaze was focused on the ticitl's face. She was smiling. Her little nose twitched curiously as if the child was trying to smell new smells. The ticitl had never met such a calm newborn.
Axayacatl can start helping Atotoztli,
Cihuacoatl continued.
Axayacatl is already quite a mature young man. As you know, our priests have already agreed that they will support him as the next Weyitlatoani of Tenochtitlan. He is the youngest son of Atotoztli and will rule longer. He can start learning how to rule our lands now.
The young man stepped up to Moctezuma and, boldly looking into his eyes, said,
I promise that I will do my mother's will in everything.
With that, he sheathed his blue dagger. Moctezuma looked at the ticitl, then he looked at cihuacoatl. The last nodded. The newborn girl and the ticitl must be killed.
No!
Atotoztli shouted. Her voice was authoritative, and her aging face, illuminated by the glare of the flames, was stern but still beautiful. Cihuacoatl, who was about to call the guards, froze. Moctezuma looked at his daughter with a surprised look.
After the priests made their choice of the next Weyitlatoani, I became a Weyitlatoani.
Atotoztli continued resolutely.
And I forbid you to kill my daughter. She will live. My word is also law now. The only person, not from our Altepetl, who will know about this secret will be the ticitl, and I oblige him to raise the girl until there is a need for her. Then, the ticitl will also witness how everything happened.
After finishing her speech, the woman looked at Axayacatl with apprehension. He felt his mother's gaze but did not respond to it and continued to stare at Moctezuma. Moctezuma sensed and understood Atotoztli's anxiety. Because of Axayacatl, she feared for the child's life. Moctezuma looked questioningly at cihuacoatl. He shrugged his shoulders. Atotoztli did not wait for their verdict.
Ticitl, what's your name?
She asked.
Chimalli.
The ticitl replied.
Chimalli, you will hide the newborn at home. You will raise her as your daughter. I will immediately send you a reward for taking care of me and my child, as well as a wet nurse and necessities for the care of the girl.
For the sake of the child's safety, Atotoztli decided to settle them in another city, and even in the presence of the cihuacoatl and Axayacatl, she would not talk about it openly. Atotoztli gave Moctezuma an imperious look. He waved his hand and started to go into another room but paused for a moment. He thought it would be better to take the young man away so that he would not harm his mother. The warriors and citizens of the city should also be sent away, so that they could not ignite unrest among the townspeople, incited by dissatisfied priests. After all, they all have been wanting to get rid of him for a long time. He understood this from their looks during meetings and festivals. Moctezuma said to Axayacatl softly,
You will help me deal with the Totonac and Zapotec tribes who don't want to celebrate our festivals with us. They are in the land where the large stone head the size of a house is buried. Beyond their land lies big water, stretching into the sky. From there, Huitzilopochtli comes to us. There we will build a new city. It will be a city on the water, similar to Tenochtitlan. And one day this city will meet Huitzilopochtli. Get ready. In this campaign, you will be my tlacochcalcatl.
Moctezuma's beautiful deep voice matched the look of his expressive, intelligent eyes. No matter how hard Axayacatl tried to keep a serious face, he could not restrain from breaking into a joyful smile. Bowing to Moctezuma, he quickly left the bedroom.
Thank you, Father.
Atotoztli said to Moctezuma.
We don't have much time left.
Moctezuma replied, looking after his grandson who had just left.
A few years maybe, and they will fly by quickly, like the flow of drops in a waterfall. And when Axayacatl becomes the Weyitlatoani, there will be no one to protect you.
Moctezuma again looked at the man snoring on the floor with a look full of hatred and then left the room. Chapter 3. The Captive. Tupac, the otomie of the military group, entered the chambers of the ticitl Chimalli. At the entrance, Tupac raised his palm with outstretched fingers to the level of his chest, decorated with the Nahue Alan necklace, and said,
Tonatiuh kuautik.
Tupac's shoulder was tied with a strip of maguey cloth, brown with dried blood. On top of Tupac's head was a shock of black hair, tied with a red ribbon. Chimalli, a man in his late 40s, stepped up to Tupac and took his uninjured hand. The hands of the guest and the host intertwined in greeting. Chimalli led Tupac to a bench in the middle of the room, sat him down, and examined the wound.
An arrow?
Chimalli instantly assessed the cause of the injury.
Yes.
Anacaona!
Chimalli called, and a girl in a light skirt and short-sleeved dark shirt came out of another room. The young woman's outfit, like her other garments, was emblazoned with a bizarre design. A lock of hair brushed her dark, friendly face like a raven's wing. The girl's face was decorated with peculiar, elaborately made tattoos, the last of which indicated her 17th birthday.
Tupac!
She exclaimed.
An arrow was taken from the warrior's shoulder.
Chimalli said.
We need to heal the wound.
Anacaona rushed to the shelves that completely covered one of the walls. There were a lot of ceramic vessels on the shelves along with large and small bags, and hanging were bunches of dried medicinal herbs. On other shelves were strange-looking tools made of copper, silver, and flint, and the sharpest ones, made of pieces of cooled lava, the obsidian glinting in the light. Broken bones and punctured skulls were next to them, and on the walls hung fabrics and sheets of Amatl, covered with drawings that represented wounds in different places of the human body with inscriptions. The walls, ceiling, and floor here were completely made of stiffened bamboo stalks of different thicknesses. The bamboo floor was covered with a substance that had a red-orange color. It was a solidified mixture of rubber and a special powder. The secret of the powder was revealed only to a select few or miners. This mixture turned into a glue that became solid and allowed long structures to be firmly connected and did not let water through. Along the other walls were two small low beds covered with woolen bedspreads. The young woman brought the necessary vessels, herbs, and a piece of canvas to the table next to where Tupac was sitting. Chimalli untied the knot on the blood-soaked bandage and yanked it off his shoulder. Tupac winced but didn't make a sound, and Anacaona found herself echoing the grimace of pain on his face. Chimalli looked at his daughter questioningly. Under the ceiling, coming out of one wall and disappearing into another, crossing the whole room, ran a long bamboo stalk with a cork stuck in the middle. Anacaona raised her hand to this cork, twisted it, and took it out. Clean water poured out of the hole. Collecting water into a small jug, Anacaona inserted the cork into place. Then she washed the wound, shifted Tupac's hand to the table, and opened one of the clay vessels. The girl sniffed the contents of the vessel with her eyes closed and seemed to nod affirmatively to herself. Now the ticitl himself took up the task. He plunged a long and thin wooden spatula into the jar, lifted a clot of black ointment at its end, smeared the ointment on the wound, and began to rub it. Tupac's eyes narrowed in pain, but he courageously remained silent. The wound began to ooze with dark black dirty blood and then with regular dark red blood.
The bad blood has to come out.
Chimalli explained. When the bleeding stopped, Chimalli opened another jar and took out another ointment. It was dark green in color. He quickly rubbed the ointment into the wound and said to his daughter,
A bandage.
Anacaona took a length of thick white cloth from a clay pot. She wrapped it around Tupac's shoulder and tied the ends of the bandage. Her work was done. Tupac smiled and stood up, but Chimalli said,
Sit down a little longer. We must wait until the drug takes full effect. You can lie down if you need to.
And Chimalli pointed to the low beds against the wall. Tupac did not answer but leaned back on the bench where he sat.
Tupac,
Anacaona asked,
have you been ashore in Huitzilopochtli's domain?
Tupac nodded gravely.
Yes, we were on the shore, behind which the sun rises. There is a big wall of black stone, but at the top, beyond it, there are beautiful spacious fields and a forest with unusual trees.
And Huitzilopochtli?
Anacaona whispered.
We met two people there who were sitting on large unknown animals. They speak an incomprehensible language and do not dress like us. They had a formidable weapon in their hands, but we tamed them.
Tupac spoke concisely and with dignity.
We brought one of them for the Tezcatlipoca festival. This person will be the iciplatli in this Toxcatl for Tezcatlipoca. Currently, he is a guest of Coatl in his house.
Tupac never answered the question about Huitzilopochtli. This omission implied a negative answer.
I'd like to see this iciplatli.
Anacaona said to herself loudly. She walked up to Tupac and wiped the last traces of blood from his shoulder with a piece of damp cloth. Tupac felt goosebumps run through his body from the touch of Anacaona's gentle hands. When the girl left the room, Tupac watched her go inside, confusion and disappointment written on his face. Noticing this, Chimalli involuntarily smiled. Anacaona was walking on the bamboo flooring covered with the solid red-orange coating. Every so often she would enter some hall, only to soon come out again, the floor continuing under her feet throughout. It brought her to the next hall, and each hall was more spacious than the other. Inside, they looked the same, just like the chambers of the healer Chimalli. Bamboo walls, ceilings, and floors. They differed only in size and decor, each with skins, Amatl, and large pieces of cloth hanging on the walls. A particular breed of turkeys was bred in one of the largest halls. In addition to meat, they also provided feathers, which were no less beautiful than a peacock's plumage. These turkeys, idling in their pens, were cared for by many people.
Tona tiu ku autik.
From time to time, people greeted Anacaona. As she exited the hall with turkeys, a young man approached her. Shifting from one foot to the other, he said that he would visit her father tomorrow. Anacaona nodded. She knew this man suffered from knee pain. Not so long ago, Anacaona and the boys were chasing a rubber ball while playing Camaxtli, and this young man was playing with them. This was probably the cause of his knee pain. She would prepare the necessary medicines for him in advance. Strangers who met this friendly, sociable girl for the first time could hardly believe that she was not afraid of blood and would steadfastly endure the screams of the wounded and the death throes of warriors. Her father began teaching Anacaona the art of healing when she was only 6 years old, long before Anacaona went to Tlaluacatli, the only school in their small suburb of Texcoco. At the same time, she began to accompany her father on military campaigns and help him treat the wounded warriors. By the age of 10, she already knew how to do almost everything: prepare healing potions, set dislocations, as well as set broken arms and legs and put clay molds on them. In peacetime, Anacaona carried carcasses of captured animals on her back alongside the hunters. She always found her place in groups of people. The older people loved her for her constant willingness to help and the young for her dexterity in games, her intelligence beyond her years, and her easygoing nature. To everyone, she was at a glance beautiful, attractive, and cheerful. As soon as they met Anacaona, everyone began to love her the same way they love children. Anacaona entered the next hall. The path she was walking along was fenced off on both sides with bamboo bars. Behind them lay mountains of potatoes, on which a man walked with his feet wrapped in a lot of rags. Anacaona adored potatoes in all their forms, except dried. As Anacaona entered a room almost adjacent to this hall, she inhaled a sharp but pleasant smell. In the small round mills that stood by the aisle, women tirelessly ground cocoa beans. They made chocolate here, which Anacaona also loved. There were jugs on the shelves against the walls, and Anacaona knew that chocolate was cooling in them. No one drank it hot except Itza. For other chocolate lovers, there were hard blocks of it on the shelves. In one of the halls through which Anacaona passed, women were weaving cloth, some made from imported cotton and some from cactus or palm fibers. Once upon a time, Anacaona, along with other youths, was also taught this skill at the Tlaluacatli. Anacaona didn't really like this work. Passing by the weavers, Anacaona coughed. The women were surrounded by clouds of dust, especially noticeable when it was pierced by the sun's rays penetrating the room from somewhere above. Not only fabrics came out from under the hands of weavers and other craftswomen, but carpets and blankets were also woven here. Clothes were sewn for local residents and warriors, and colorful ribbons with drawings that warriors and townspeople wore on their upper arms were prepared. The owner could present it when he was in another city, and it was clear to everyone who he was. Additionally, the signs on the ribbon told where he lived, when and where he was born, and his main occupation. By putting a number of lines and dots on the ribbon, the owner could also show how many captives he had taken in battles. Right now, as Anacaona watched, Patli, having removed his ribbon from his shoulder, handed it to the craftswoman and poked his finger at the spot of dried blood on his shoulder, requesting a new red point on his ribbon. The next room was completely reserved for dyeing fabrics. To obtain fabrics of the desired color, they were soaked for a long time in ceramic vats filled with colored liquids. Scarlet fabric was especially appreciated. For that hue, the dye was obtained from beetles that were bred here. Dyes were also made from shellfish, plants, clay, and rocks which were pounded in mortars and mixed with special additives in specific proportions. In other halls, where small gardens were located, fruits and vegetables were grown. They grew on the ground, planted in special wooden containers. Usually, these numerous spacious rooms were, as they were now, in the open air, but if necessary, during excessive heat or prolonged rains, they were covered with light panels, from which it was possible to instantly make a roof. In some places, openings in the walls were also covered with such panels. These were also treated with the rubber mixture and did not let water through. Storerooms were also made with similar panels, where rainwater was collected, so it could flow through the bamboo trunks into rooms and workshops. This was water for drinking only. Touching water in storage tanks or using it for other purposes, such as watering gardens, including vegetable gardens, was strictly prohibited. There was no place for a fire in any room. It may illuminate a room at night better than the light of the moon and stars that penetrated through open roofs or long windows, but a fire here could lead to the end of their world. Fire could only be obtained in one place, in the chambers of Coatl's assistant, cihuacoatl Tlaluacatli Camaxtli. After receiving the fire, the person had to return to Camaxtli and inform him that there was no need for the fire anymore, and it was extinguished. Finally, Anacaona left behind the artisans' workrooms, and the bamboo forest spread out green in front of her. It was dissected by paths leading away from where she stood and toward the center. At the edge of this forest, Anacaona saw men who were harvesting the trunks of the stiffened stems. Cutting the stem at the bottom, they did not let it fall but carefully pulled it aside. The tops of the stems were held in place by a huge rope network that didn't allow the forest to sway. The bamboo grew at an incredible rate. A sprig, barely emerging from the ground, could become a stalk as tall as an adult in a couple of days. Bamboo was the main construction material in Tlaluacatli, their current home. While one grove of bamboo was being used for repairs, the next one was growing and would be suitable for use in a couple of weeks. Therefore, bamboo stalks were always ready at people's fingertips. In Tlaluacatli, it grew even faster because the forest was irrigated with water with special supplements. Such water was also used in vegetable gardens, along with fertilizer created from bird droppings and animal manure, which was carefully collected every day in the halls. In the center of this bamboo forest stood the house of tlatoani Tlaluacatli, the ruler of this town, a man whom everyone obeyed. He was the priest and judge Coatl. Anacaona was walking towards his house now. The closer she got, the more she saw other people flocking to the house. All of them walked only on paths. No one dared to walk on the soil where the bamboo forest grew. A small one-story house with a thatched roof was already surrounded by a roaring crowd. After learning about the Ticitl, a man captured on an unknown shore and brought here for the festival. People were greatly alarmed. No one had told them anything yet. Now one of them was trembling with fear and said that the captive was a servant of Ticitl or was his messenger. And people said he was almost strangled. They say he fell from an unknown animal, hit the ground hard with his shoulder, and is now immobilized. Ticitl can be angry. Others rejoiced. After all, the Ticitl, even if they could not yet understand him, could bring good news telling them how to protect themselves and their children from ordinary adversity, how to end outbreaks of hunger and disease forever, how to achieve universal prosperity, and how happy Tezcatlipoca would be with this gift. Approaching the crowd, Anacaona said loudly,
Ticitl for Ticitl.
People turned to her and parted. Many nodded to her affably. Almost everyone knew this young woman and her father. Anacaona climbed the steps and walked into the house. Before the threshold, she got down on one knee, lowered her head, and kissed a small bag lying there. It contained sacred land gathered in the middle of Weyitlatoani, in the center of Tenochtitlan. Getting up from the steps and entering, Anacaona looked around. In a spacious room, Coatl and Ocotlan were sitting on low benches. Coatl held a small bundle of brown leaves in his hand, smoking at one end. He made fire with the help of a fail-safe flint, the device which was known to him alone. From time to time Coatl raised the cluster to his lips and sucked in the smoke. The men were sitting at a low round table covered with a blue tablecloth with yellow patterns. There was a jug, 2 bowls, and a platter of fruit on the table. Together with Ocotlan, Coatl examined the armor and weapons brought from the shore, 2 swords, knives, and a crossbow. All the equipment was lying near the table on one of the carpets that covered the floor. There was another table nearby, rectangular and without a tablecloth. On it lay a large gold plate with the image of a pyramid protruding from the waves of the sea. There were 3 similar rooms in this house. The walls of these rooms were extremely richly decorated. On them hung ornaments made of gold and multicolored stones, weapons, stuffed animal heads, and large sheets of Amatl covered with drawings and from time to time repeated glyphs. In the corner of the room, there was a large bed partially hidden by a partition made of mats near the headboard. There was a table by the bed. The captive was lying on the bed, and his fair-skinned face and hands immediately struck Anacaona. 2 ladies were fussing around him. One of them, Malintica, was also an assistant to her father. She was tying up the black and blue shoulder of the captive, clearly the result of a very strong blow, with a strip of light fabric, under which there was already packed a bunch of medicinal herbs. Another lady had just poured a drink from a jug into a mug and was now holding it out to the captive with a smile. The captive was smiling. Apparently, he had already consumed more than 1 mug of this drink. He was also obviously enjoying the company of the 2 ladies, and they even encouraged him. Taking the mug, he looked at the lady with the jug and said something in his language. However, the ladies appeared a little bit worried.
Coatl, tlatoani of Tlaluacatli, can I help heal Ticitl?
Anacaona asked. Coatl blew a cloud of smoke from his mouth and said,
Anacaona, daughter of Chimalli, your help is welcome. Help Malintica heal Ticitl and help Tlacochcalcatl cook him the best chocolate dinner. Also, bring him another pitcher of Ocotli. See how glad he is for it.
Tana tiu kuautik.
Anacaona said to the captured soldier with a smile. He also smiled from ear to ear and said something. Before, ladies rarely spoiled him with this much attention. Then Anacaona noticed another person. He had been standing against the wall in the shadows, and now he came to the table where Coatl and Ocotlan were sitting. He wore a hat made up of 4 rings of different fabrics. Long wavy hair fell over his shoulders, framing a beautiful, young, slightly feminine face. His body was covered from shoulders to knees by an unusual sand-colored shirt. Along his collarbone hung a necklace, from which brown fringe swayed, and a similarly designed belt covered his torso. From his back hung a cape made of the skin of some animal. In his hand, the man held a ritual staff with an obsidian knob. Despite his rich clothes, he was without shoes. This was Camaxtli, cihuacoatl of Tlaluacatli.
Coatl,
He said,
as you ordered, I checked our supplies. We have about 1 whinel of water left if we use it as usual. There is also no shortage of food, and no shortage is expected, because everyone who creates it works tirelessly. However, the people have been worried since you brought the ticitl.
Coatl, looking directly at Camaxtli, raised an eyebrow, but did not break his silence.
To appease Huitzilopochtli,
Cihuacoatl continued,
offerings are needed. We all depend on his benevolence. Perhaps Huitzilopochtli is already angry with us for the trouble we have caused on his land. People are afraid that Huitzilopochtli will spew a terrible fire and bring down the sky on them. We're all scared.
Huitzilopochtli is not angry with those who observe festivals.
Coatl said,
And we do. Go, and don't be afraid. Prepare Tlaluacatli for the Tezcatlipoca festival. And don't forget, Tlaluacatli was built specially to meet Huitzilopochtli. That's why we're all here.
Camaxtli hesitated for a moment, turned around, and silently left the room.
Even if Huitzilopochtli does not come to us, our endeavors will not have been in vain.
Coatl told Ocotlan,
We will take new captives from those who do not follow our festivals in Ocotlan and research their land to understand how they mine and craft their metal.
Ocotlan grabbed the jug on their table and filled his cup. After drinking its contents, he pointed his finger at the sword lying on the floor and said,
Yes, these Macuahuitl and Ichcahuapilli are made of very strong metal. I've never seen the likes of these before. Even if we found out right now how they mine it, it will take a long time before we learn how to make weapons and armor from such metal by ourselves. Their Macuahuitl is more dangerous than a snake's tongue, than the paws of a jaguar, and the teeth of a crocodile. They are superior to ours in almost everything.
Ocotlan glanced briefly at the soldier wiping his lips after another mug of Octli, a cloudy white drink made from agave juice.
And if they all turn out to be our enemies,
he continued,
we will not be able to resist them. We will not be able to repel their attack in open battle.
Ocotlan raised the cup to his lips again and took a sip. This was the same drink that was being served to the captive.
Besides, they are armed with these strange bows.
Coatl said, pointing to the crossbow.
We must learn how to craft and use it.
Ocotlan picked up the crossbow from the floor and began to examine it closely.
Arrows from this bow fly faster than the arrows of our bows,
he said.
They fly faster than the strongest wind. Tupac couldn't even fathom that an arrow could have been fired at him from such a small device, and these arrows are much smaller than ours.
Ocotlan turned the taut bowstring between his fingers.
I already understand how this bow works,
he continued.
Such a bow could only be made by very smart people with agile hands. They also use the same metal that their Macuahuitl are made of. Without it, it would not work to make such bows. Look how springy this bow is. To bend it and put an arrow in this shoot, you need either the strength of a giant or cunning. To release the arrow, you need a hook made of the same hard metal, and here's a plate.
Ocotlan turned the crossbow back over.
That holds the arrow.
Ocotlan casually hit the plate with his thumbnail, and it made a ting like an arrow against metal.
Our metal can't sing like that,
Ocotlan concluded,
because our metal is soft and malleable.
Anacaona took a piece of chocolate, put it in a stone bowl, and crushed it into small pieces. Then, she handed the captive a handful of chocolate shards. He looked at them in surprise. Anacaona took a piece from the bowl, put it in her mouth, and began to chew. The captive did the same. A smile spread across his face again, and the captive's lips began to turn black from the chocolate. Meanwhile, Anacaona was furtively examining the captive's face and hands. The outlines of his face and body were not very different from the people of Aztlan, but his skin was strikingly fair. Maybe they have different diseases, too? Different from people of Aztlan. She thought silently to herself.
These people have skin the color of the Camaxtli, the moon.
Coatl said, as if confirming Anacaona's thoughts.
You can't expect rabbits to fight bravely.
Ocotlan appreciated the joke and smiled. The rabbit among the people of Aztlan was a symbol of the moon.
Rabbits run away at any sign of danger. All we need to do is run faster and catch them. This morning,
Coatl continued,
his friend tried to escape as soon as our warriors were ready for battle. The Weyitlatoani, people the color of the moon, are not brave people. You will lose if you have superior armor but are not brave in battle.
Coatl got up from his chair, went to the bamboo trunk, which, like in Chimalli's chambers, passed under the ceiling, and filled his bowl with water. After quenching his thirst, he lay down on a mat covered with a wool blanket that was spread out on top of the carpet not far from the bed. Ocotlan put the crossbow back on the floor and looked at Coatl. The priest stretched and yawned loudly. He didn't even look at the women because they were Massachualtan commoners. Moreover, Coatl did not pay attention to the captive, yet started speaking about him.
We will try to meet Huitzilopochtli again, but before that, Tezcatlipoca will receive a treat.
Coatl squinted at the captive. The soldier was placidly chewing chocolate and gawking at Anacaona as she was listening attentively to the priest. The bandage on the captive's shoulder was beginning to slip, and the grass under it had quickly rubbed to dust. Despite the monstrous bruise that covered his shoulder, he did not seem to pay attention to it.
And then the TDO will favor us.
Coatl continued.
They'll come out from the other side of the wall and meet us. We will celebrate so loudly that the sky will hear the sounds of our joy. Yes, they will come.
Ocotlan stood up and respectfully lowered his head. Coatl greatly admired the obedience of the tlacochcalcatl warlord and his shrewdness.
After the festival is over, I'll go meet you near your boats.
Coatl directed.
You will be waiting for me there with your warriors.
Ocotlan nodded and picked up the bowl again. Ocotlan was a pillai. His class was equal to that of Coatl but of a lower social rank. He might not bow to Coatl, but he still emphasized his loyalty to Tlatoani, and the latter liked it very much. After taking another sip, Ocotlan asked,
Now, may I go and select the warriors and prepare them for the next visit to Ocotlan?
Coatl raised his hand. His fingers were spread out approvingly.
Tonatiukuautik.
Ocotlan.
Anacaona repeated in her mind.
The land beyond the sea. I have to go there with them. I, too, must go with the warriors and see the land of Huitzilopochtli.
The servant, Tlacochcalcatl, looked at the smiling captive's face and poured the remains of the intoxicating Octli drink into his mug. Opening the door, Ocotlan went out onto the porch and began to descend the steps. The crowd, 2 heads shorter than Ocotlan, respectfully parted before the mountain of muscles.
What is he?
People shouted after him.
Is he a ticitl or a man?
Moctezuma tlapalipan Weyitlatoani, a white man from a far country across the sea.
Ocotlan replied.